Hello folks, welcome to this Farming and Water Scotland webinar, part 4 of the Managing Slurry for Folks in a Hurry webinar series. My name's Alec Perry and I will be the host for tonight. We're joined by a returning panel of specialist speakers from previous webinars. So we have Mr. Adrian Jones, Dr. Bill Crooks, Hugh McClymont, Stephen Field and our own Seamus Donnelly. And I'm joined again by our moderator for this evening, Mr. Seamus Murphy. I see there are still another few folk joining the meeting, but we'll just get kicked off and we'll catch up. Okay, so similar kind of format tonight to previous nights. If you have any questions, this is an open panel night, so we would encourage as many questions as possible. You will be able to use the chat function. Unfortunately, Q&A is no longer available as we're on a meeting format and not a webinar tonight. So just keep that in mind and try and use the chat function. And at the very beginning of this meeting tonight, I'd like to invite Mr. Ian Watson of Keys Hill Farm. Has graciously agreed to come on and speak a little bit about his transition away from splash plates. Very topical at the moment. A lot of people are concerned about it. We've seen the Sustainable Agriculture Capital Grant come and go, and farmers are being asked to make some fairly serious investments into how they manage and use slurry going forward. Ian, are you there?
Yes.
Brilliant. Ian, would you like to say a few words about your transition away from splash plates and how you think it's impacted your business?
Well, introduce myself, Ian Watson, Keys Hill, it's there. Way back when we started at my own, we're sharing 2 tankers with 2 brothers between 3. Moving on for there. 11 years ago, we invested in an umbilical system between myself and one of the brothers. It was a splash plate system. Foremost, I was consciously aware of the smell of slurry in the atmosphere and around the local houses and such likes, that the 1 or 2 next to me. And that was my sort of first investigation into dribble bars. So it was 8 years ago when I did buy a dribble bar and started using it. So I've been using that for quite a wee while now and having good results. You can see the grass coming away a wee bit better. When you're using the splash plate, you'll see the seagulls arriving and spending maybe a good day or 2 days on your field picking up worms and things. But when you're using the dribble bar, definitely the seagulls will come and have a look around, but it won't be there long till they're heading away again, because they're not finding very much. On the smell thing, one of my neighbours did actually come forward and says, "Yeah, that's been a big difference. We don't really notice the smell of that much at all now." Moving forward, last year, we went our own ways in terms of the umbilical system. Brother got one for himself, and I carried on with the old one. But we did have a change, so I'm into a different dribble bar now. It's a wee bit wider, and I'm finding that I can turn at the ends much better. So where with the one I had, we're getting a wee bit double overlapping at the ends because you're reversing. But now we're managing most of the time just to drive up and turn and away, and you're not doing just as much double overlapping. But no, I certainly say it's been a good system for us, and looking forward, we're happy going forward using it in the future.
And in your opinion, Ian, the dribble bars that you're using, the various pieces of kit, are these fairly straightforward to use? I mean, do you see the uptake of these pieces of equipment being quite big within the sector, or Is this really something that a specialist contractor would need?
Well, there's a bit more expense in it. A thing you have on it is a macerator, which it just chops up the slurry. If there's any wee bits of straw, that it's really just so that it doesn't block your tubes. So there's a bit more money in it, but it's easy enough work. My own one there, I got it last year, and just to save the money a wee bit, I did not put a flow meter on. But with the benefit of the SAG's grant there, I've just added the flow meter on. So I haven't had a chance to use it yet. I only got added a couple of weeks ago there. But going forward, that's going to give me the flexibility and being able to better monitor the flow rates and the application rates that we're going to be applying. We'll be more able to make records of what we have actually applied in different fields. But I mean, with a flow meter, without a flow meter, it's still a good system. And I wouldn't say it's hard to use, it's quite easy enough to use. And so the only thing is, in the past where I need to stop the reverse, it was pouring out pretty quick. And you had to be as quick as you could at trying not to be stopped. But I say this one is a wee bit better. You can most of the time keep driving forward and turn on the boot away.
Yeah. And you feel you've got a better soil slurry contact ratio there? Obviously, there's less potential for aeration.
Yes, I mean, I would say when you've used the double bar, your fuel's still breathing. When you've spread it with a splash plate, it's more or less suffocating. There's not even as much surface contamination. Your fuel is, you can see it's a wee bit coloured, but it's not black compared to some of the ones with the splash plates, which can only be better. Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Maybe a slight drawback, you notice, especially if it's quite dry, you'll see it kind of growing in lines a wee bit. And when you look at the beginning, you think, I've burned that, but actually the bit that's not as green as the bit in between the lines. And you do notice that a wee bit. If a bit more rain going on, it seems to spread it across a bit quicker. But sometimes you do see it just a wee bit growing in lines.
What kind of bedding material would you recommend for that kind of system?
Bedding?
Yeah, what would you recommend? Would you change your bedding to better for that system? Yeah.
Well, most of the time I'm using sawdust in my cubicles.
Sawdust, that works. Have you used straw yourself through that system?
Never used straw at all. You may get a little bit of straw come from the little straw pen or that getting into it, but you get wee bits of silage going on. Yeah. Which that's where your macerator comes in. It's chopping these little bits up so that it runs down the tubes. But no, personally, it's sawdust in the beds, and slurry is quite fluid. At home, we're storing in like above ground circular stores. I did start with another place there last year. It's underground stores, and it's long narrow tanks, and it's more young stock, so it's a drier slurry, and it's a drier silage they're eating, so it's quite stiff. It's a wee bit different to work with, but still, I just need to add a wee bit of water to it just to make sure it's fluid enough.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see the dry matter content that you work with in that system. Would be quite interesting. So, because that's an important thing to manage, when it comes to spreading too.
Normally you're looking at a 1-to-1 dilution, ideally as a minimum, to go through a macerator. If you're a 1-to-1, so wash and rainfall versus added together versus slurry, it normally handles quite well through the macerator.
And what is that? What's that dry matter, Adrian? What dry matter content's that then?
4 or 5%, quite low.
So you can't, you couldn't go up to 8%?
Yes, you can, but that depends upon the flow rate through the macerator normally. What size tubes are you using? The drop tubes, the sprinklers?
It'll be 50 millimeters.
Yeah, so Ian, so you know, there's a limit to the dry matter, even with the macerator on. I know 20 years or so ago, Hugh, if he's still there, I can't see Hugh, but you were using 4-inch drop pipes, weren't you, initially?
Yeah, just to come in on that, Adrian, yeah, we did many years ago, but now we're down to, I would say, the 50 millimeter pipes on our latest dribble bar that we have now that we're operating via umbilical light. So, yeah.
I mean, the trick really is to keep the dilution at 1:1 to 2:1, and to lift the pressure if you can. So better lines, a better pump at the other end. You keep the pressure up, you're getting an even distribution from side to side with the macerator on there. But it worked very well. There's a lot of new ones coming onto the market now with sort of newly developed macerator heads. Some of them have got 2 on and 3 on, and they really make quite a nice job. And I think looking at the way they do the work, like you're pointing out, Ian, they're as good as a slip shoe, really.
So where does that macerator have to sit in the system, Adrian? Can it be flexible where it goes?
It sits on top of the machine above the boom normally, and a single one, I think, which Ian might have. Have you? A single macerator? Yeah.
I used to have a single, but I now have a double.
Yeah. So the single one will sit in the center of the machine, but the limit to that is the number of outlets, obviously, and then the bout width. The 2 and 3 macerator units now are up to 16 meter to 20 meter bout width, and still giving quite an even output on a 50 mil hose. But the trick is to keep the umbilical, the pump pressure, high at the end of the line. I know Hugh's system used to use 1 or 2 bar at the end of the line, and you've got to sort of triple that really. So for hills and long runs, kinks in pipes make a difference. So it's worth thinking about the lines and the runs and the contractor that's using it, you know, to avoid kinking at the ends and the corners.
So give me a rate, and give me a rate. What am I talking? Do I have a rate penalty on this thing compared to spot?
Well, no, you can control the rate, obviously, as Ian will know, but I mean, your pump rate is the first thing to consider. So our typical pump rate today will be between 100 and 200 cube an hour.
Yeah.
That's the rate of slurry going along the pipe to the machine.
Okay, so give me that in old money then.
You are adjusting the bout width and the forward speed to deduce what the actual application rate is. But typically, you'll be working at 25 to cube a hectare.
Okay.
I would have thought with these machines.
All right. So that's a good rate. Yeah.
Can I think I'll just jump back in, folks, before we get too technical here. Ian, I just wanted to highlight as well. Obviously, you're here tonight, and you've spoken a little bit about your transition to using dribble bars. We have recorded a video with you as well. We were out and watching some of the application. So that will be available going forward. So thanks very much for getting involved with us, and hopefully we can we'll take a bit of the pressure off you now, and we'll move to the Q&A session. Before we do that, I know some of the attendees might have been looking to speak to Robert Veach from Strand Head Farm. He was scheduled to join us tonight. Unfortunately, Robert is unable to be with us, so he sends his apologies, and we're hopeful that we can catch up with him further down the line and maybe see a little bit of what's going on at Strand Head as well. For those who maybe joined a little late as well, I have just launched the poll that we have running for tonight. So there's a series of questions that can be answered by any of the attendees anonymously. And we just want to get a feel for what the current lay of the land is in terms of slurry management application. There's some questions there revolving around funding, and health and safety as well. So if you want to take a look at that, that would be much appreciated. But I think we'll go straight into the Q&A session for tonight, if that's all right. And Seamus, are you there? We have we've compiled a list of questions in advance of tonight, but by all means, if anybody has any burning questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And if you feel strongly about speaking, you can do that also.
Yeah, we've got a few questions that were sent in previous before the webinar started. But if anyone on here wants to ask a question, you can unmute yourself there and you can ask away. We've got the experts on the panel there, and all here is an opportunity to ask whatever questions you might have. But I think to start off, I'll probably ask a question. I suppose it'll be to all of you on the panel, but are there any instances where reducing cow numbers is a better alternative to upping storage capacity? Do some cows or do some farms carry too many cows? Who wants to take that up first then? Hugh?
I think I'll jump in there, seeing as I thought maybe Hugh would have come in there with the number of cows SCC have currently. The bottom line is the cows are there. They're on that farm because they suit that farm. They built the numbers to whatever level they're at. Even if they had half the number of cows, it doesn't mean that they would necessarily improve their slurry management or reduce their risk of slurry contamination. So I always say start off with whatever you've got on the farm, and the important thing is probably to try to make sure that you reduce any risk of runoff, but also start by thinking about how can I reduce the amount of slurry I'm actually needing to collect. And I'll let other people come in, but there's something I always have in my mind whenever going to farm the first time is just point out maybe the amount of runs that are maybe missing on sheds. And if you look at that on the basis that every 100 foot by 40 foot shed or every 100 foot by 40 foot dirty yard, it doesn't need to be dirty, is the equivalent over the winter of 40 tanker loads of slurry that you have to get rid of. So I would always tackle it first and foremost, I think, on what have you got, how can you make that better? And I think we'll leave the number of cows to, he can maybe decide that on his other costs, etc., because he's got that structure already in place.
Yeah. And does anyone else want to come in on that?
Well, I know certainly, Seamus, I'll just jump in here. Certainly the current agri-environment climate scheme funding, the slurry options that are available through that, you are actively discouraged from going for slurry storage with the intent of increasing your cattle numbers. So there certainly is an element of cow numbers in there and wanting to discourage larger and larger herds. But I think Seamus is right. I think it's about being smarter with how we farm and in particular what's on the steading and how we're managing that.
Great. I'll move on if there's no other.
If I could maybe come back in, the loan situation, the farm at Keys Hill, it's 126 acres. I've got other ground a wee bit further away. So back when we done the stores, it was on the SRDP thing about 8 or 9 years ago. I built a store on some of the other ground and we ferry it along there and store it there and then spread from there, which allows us to use the umbilical system better, rather than it always stored at the home place. Don't know if that helps other folks. I know I see there are 1 or 2 remote stores appearing around about the countryside now.
We pushed that hard down in our area about 4 or 5 years ago, and the timing was good because it was obviously the department had come in with the good grants for slurry stores. We favoured in many cases the idea that the unit was cheaper to build, but we were trying to encourage farmers. We talked about pods. But the slurry store doesn't necessarily need to be slap bang next to your steading. In many ways, we did a lot of soil sampling. in an area that subsequently became a nitrate vulnerable zone. And we sampled 60 farms and we looked at the levels of P and K. And what you got was, I call it the ring of confidence around the steading. Years and years ago, somebody would have gone out with a small 1,000-gallon tanker. And more recently, the ring of confidence has extended with the umbilical. It'll do maybe 1,200, 1,500 meters. But beyond that, a lot of the fields are maybe not getting a lot of slurry. So we pointed out that maybe it made sense to just pump from your main store and actually site a new store further away. And that meant that you could do it with one lift, and you're actually cutting down transport time and transport cost, because that, I know Adrian's always going about the cost of actually hauling slurry about, hauling water about.
I've seen it work really well, but you have to invest in the infrastructure. You got to pay attention to, you know, where it's cost effective to put a pipe under a road or something. You do have to make the effort to do that sometimes, so that you got a good way of moving between facilities. If you know, that's because that can be time consuming.
Alex, can I come in the back of that one now?
Yep.
Just to back up Seamus, but Adrian has stayed quiet at the moment. But another way of managing slurry and managing numbers of cows is, but Seamus talked a lot about water there, and dare I say, keeping clean water or yardage water out of slurry. But if you can, if we're milking cows once, twice, 3 times a day, or whatever frequency, you have to wash your parlours. But if you can divert that water into a different vessel out of your slurry, effectively your slurry is of higher dry matter, and that water then can be measured back in to give you the right consistency when you want to spread and make it more manageable. But when you're actually collecting, be it parlour washings, dairy washings, twice daily is the norm for milking cows still, you know, you are collecting a lot of water. But if you design your steading and your stores, and whether they're remote stores or not, that's another fascinating way of dealing with it, to get that ring, as you talk it, much larger. And in my talk that other night when I spoke, is basically having an infrastructure you can push slurry to the outer extremities of your farm, so every field gets an even application, which balances up your whole soil nutrient basis, like Peanut saying.
That actually, yeah, sorry, I'm in there.
Nobody's mentioned separating slurry separators, and you know, by covering lagoons and keeping the water out and separation at the same time, you can make a big difference.
We talked quite a bit about covering lagoons and slurry separators in previous webinars. So I don't know if Adrian might want to come in. I know you had, remember you had a lot to say about the covering lagoons and stuff anyway.
Yes, I don't think we need to say a lot more, except for in response to the comment, I agree with the gentleman completely that the covering is ideal and separation is ideal. The problem at the moment with both of those, and you may agree or not agree on the issue of separation, but we have the techniques to separate, but we don't really have the reliability and the robustness that we need to match the variable materials that we're handling on farm. Hugh's tried to separate a couple of times, and the principle is right, but getting it to work reliably day in, day out is not always that easy.
I agree 100%, Adrian. It's spot on. That's been my experience, 100%.
In my travels I see more stationary and redundant separators sitting on farms than I do ones that are actually working. When it comes to covering of lagoons, the covering of circular slurry stores is relatively easy. The technology's been with us for years to put a structural cover over a circular slurry store. The lagoons are very much more difficult. There are 2 major companies that I'm in contact with in the UK that are trying to develop satisfactory coverings for what we know as lined rectangular slurry lagoons. They were selling covers, they've stopped selling covers, and they're now pushing development to try to find alternative and practical ways of achieving an end result, the objective to cover it, not only to keep ammonia in, which we're going to be asked to do anyway, but also to keep rainfall out. Nobody can argue with that as a 100% objective. We've got to try to achieve that. But it's back, similar situation I see to separation. At the moment, we're struggling with lagoons to find practical, robust and workable covers.
Well, I could, to a certain extent, dispute that. I think. I mean, there's an awful lot of very successful floating covers on lagoons down south and certainly on mainland Europe.
Do you think as the price of water keeps rising, we'll maybe see it become an easier option to actually consider gathering the water that falls on your covered lagoons and utilising that? I had a farmer last week, he was complaining about the price of water. And I said, well, there's one option. Start collecting rainwater harvesting off your roofs. If it means putting it through a UV filter, fine, but you can do the same thing off your slurry stores, and that might be the catalyst. Just going back to slurry separation, I actually think that I think that will be hear what Adrian's saying about the actual machines not working right. And I don't know, Adrian, doesn't make any difference whether you go for the tight squeeze or the gradual squeeze, the one that isn't just as high a dry matter. Is there any difference in the reliability of the machines?
Would you put that question to Hugh, who has had one of the latter ones? Maybe he'd like to comment on that. It's Hugh's separator was a simple screen separator, wasn't it, Hugh?
Yeah, I'll put my hand up to react to that, Adrian, on the call, on that actual point. I thought it was a great way of working and managing slurry. I still consider it is. But the biggest problem was, you touched on it, reliability of machinery. We are working in a very harsh environment in terms of it is slurry, it is foul, and it invariably it's sitting outside and it's at either high level or whatever. And that you're working a whole series of mechanisms to keep it working properly. So reliability is the one there that keeps going without breaking down. I'm not sure there is. And the other one I was going to say, and as Adrian remembers, when I was a bit younger, and so was he, the colour of his beard was a different colour from tonight, Mike, but never mind. It goes back to when I first started separation, I was very keen to make this work, and I would spend a lot of my personal time making it work, but getting staff, and one of the biggest challenges, and I don't want to digress this whole meeting about slurry, but we do need people on our farms, and getting people to make this sort of equipment work is becoming more and more challenging. And as the session was headed, as Alex put up, dealing with slurry in a hurry, we seem to be these days chasing our tail all the time. Yes, the mechanisms can work if we've got the right people to make it work, but I think that's one of the biggest challenges going forward. And if we can manage our slurry in a much easier way, I think of keeping the water out, as I said earlier, and then allowing that in and giving a well mixed sample when we go to spread, we can probably handle it much easier. That's my present take on that at the moment.
Brilliant.
I think we'll move on to another question. I think that we touched on loads of different topics there, and we could go on forever on these, but I'll try and touch on a few different questions here. This one, there was one come in about the importance of soil health in slurry nutrient uptake. So I don't know if, Bill, you want to speak about that maybe to start.
Yeah, no, it's a very important topic, and very important in the sense too that you're always looking to target the nutrient application when there's a crop demand, okay? Because that also coincides with soil conditions that are optimum for spreading, okay? So there's the combination of the two, okay? We're spreading the slurry when there's the crop needs it, and in this case mainly grassland, so we're talking pretty close to the front end. As soon as soil conditions are optimum, so our soil temperatures are up to target 5 degrees or so, and soil conditions are suitable for spreading. Okay, and that's really very important because if we do even a slight bit of damage to soil structure, or even a slight bit of damage to a land drain by accessing land when it's too wet, then the value of that slurry is completely wiped out. Okay, there's no benefit to that. It could do some long-term damage if you don't really pay attention to soil health. So and that's again part of that message is making sure that you have the capacity to store your slurry so you can spread in the spring, because we're all going to, you know, there's been that we all have a requirement to do that, and in an increasing requirement to do that. So it's something everyone's got to be thinking about. Okay, so spreading during the winter now is going to be something it's not going to be as acceptable.
Stephen, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I'll come in on that. Well, I think I'm off mute. No, I think what Bill says is correct. We need to have a good soil structure. We need to have it that's an optimum potential to use the best nutrients that are within that slurry. We've got to start thinking of slurry as a real good organic fertilizer, good organic nutrient, and get the best value out of that as we can, and obviously maybe reduce costs in terms of inorganic fertilizers. But spreading time is very, very important, and as regulations are amended and changed, the likelihood of being able to spread during the winter is going to become minimal. Our climate is changing. We're seeing prolonged periods of wet weather during the winter, and sometimes longer, sometimes unfortunately in the summer as well. So yeah, storage is key going forward, and therefore being able to apply your slurry at the best time is the best way forward. Yep.
That's great.
Could I maybe just come in there as a seasoned older advisor and also somebody who's spread a fair amount of slurry in his time? I used to think that we were trying to feed the crop at the right time, so I'd put on a good dollop of slurry in the springtime, and it might even have an even bigger amount of slurry available for first cut silage aftermath. Because I was able to get it on whenever the ground was dry. Well, obviously, anybody that drives through the countryside in a dry summer's day and somebody's spreading slurry, we quickly realised that there's an awful lot of smell, there's an awful lot of ammonia going up, volatilized up into the atmosphere. And that's obviously a big no-no as we look to try and move towards meeting the Scottish targets for reducing carbon footprint. Work done in the south of Ireland by Antiagus, the equivalent of the college, on their research farms, they've come up with one or 2 pointers. And one of the ones that they've actually said to try and get farmers to think about to reduce the carbon footprint is simply to move the amount of slurry they spread in the springtime, increase it, or move 20% away from what they spread in the summertime to the springtime, when conditions are good, and still staying within the 30-35 cube per hectare target. But by doing that alone, you can reduce your carbon footprint by 1.5%. That doesn't sound a lot, but that's something you can do for no real cost. There's no extra cost. You're still going to be spreading your slurry. And those are the sort of things I suspect Scottish Government will be trying to pick up and trying to get the practical farmers. It's just a very simple thing. Spread a wee bit more slurry, and of course take account of that in your whenever you're calculating how much bagged fertilizer you're going to put on with that.
Just to
Steve,
Bill.
Stephen, can I ask you a question quickly? Sorry, can you remind me, maybe if you, I don't want to put you on the spot. If with the precision application, are we going to be allowed to go closer to the burn?
Not at this present point in time. That was introduced in the south of the border, where they've gone to 5 meters. Yeah, 5 meters.
Are you of a mind?
It won't come down to us. It will be a decision that the Scottish Government will make, but I think they'll want to ensure that having the 10-meter rule across the country is maintained at this present point. And if the farmers do move and contractors do move to precision techniques, and we're not getting as many runoff pollution incidents, you may see them adapting or may change what their rules will be in the future.
I think that's that's an important thing to consider. Okay, so yeah,
yep.
Hopefully we do see that, because I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that move.
Great. Well, I think at this stage we're about halfway through. So if anyone has any more questions or any other questions, make sure and fire them in or unmute yourself. Alex, the poll is closed there now, so I don't know if you want to go through the results there.
Yeah, can do. Just hold on 1 second.
I can share in here.
So yeah, some really interesting results there, having not seen them myself. So just shy of 60% of the attendees here tonight have between 10 and 22 weeks of slurry storage. So it could be that the slurry storage and the stuff that Adrian in particular is covering is of great interest to yourselves. Interesting that 42% of the attendees have used rural priorities to up their slurry storage, while only 17% have currently used the Agri-Environment Climate Scheme. And another 42% have used no form of funding for storage. With regards to how many people are regularly sampling and testing their slurry, there is 58% are doing it, yes, but not regularly, Bill. And when it comes to slurry spreading kit, 67% are using dribble bars, which is exciting. I wonder whether or not that's maybe a result or partially contributed to by the Sustainable Agriculture Capital Grant, but that's certainly encouraging. And that's interesting. 42% of the attendees have maintained or serviced their stores within the last 2 years. So Stephen, I know that that was something that you mentioned last week as a real bugbear, so that's good. And unfortunately, Seamus, 67% of the attendees do not have a health and safety plan or an emergency plan in place for working safely with slurry. But an important topic covered last week, and would encourage anybody who missed it to go back and watch some of the recordings.
Yeah.
Okay. Brilliant.
I think that kind of leads us on. Well, the initial bit anyway, slurry storage leads us on nicely to another question that came in, probably for Stephen maybe again. Why are there no grants available to replace slurry storage within NVZ areas?
That is a good question. That would be a good question for Scottish Government. But in reality, the NVZ regulations, when they came in a number of years ago, there was a grant scheme available for livestock farmers to put slurry stores in. And they've always had that up until the last NVZ action programme, where the information they were getting back from farmers was, and from their consultants was, that all farmers were meeting the 22-week rule. And then once they stopped that grant application and I think started to look at it, farmers then came out of the woodwork and said, look, I need a derogation because we haven't got a significant slurry storage. It is, the grants funding system is through Scottish Government and ARPID, and it is the decision that they actually take. But I do know that there was grant available within NVZs for it must have been about 8 years before they actually closed the scheme.
It's just, Stephen, everyone's got to comply with the storage requirements, don't they? So
yeah,
it's not just NVZs.
Not just NVZs. That when the SAFA, the Control of Pollution, Silage, Slurry and Agricultural Fuel Oil regulations came in 1991, it required farmers to have 180 days slurry storage, i.e. the winter period.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have forgotten that.
Yeah, that's one thing that has been forgotten over a number of years. What we've seen is that through old RDP schemes, a lot of that 180 days in wintering period was actually, they had it at one particular point in time. And I think just with the progression of livestock farming and the dairy industry, the cattle numbers have increased significantly on farms. I know when I started working in the Ayrshire area in 1995, I did a wee bit of pilot work in the Water of Coyle catchment, and the average dairy herd size, milking herd at that period in time was about 90 cows. We went back around those farms probably in 2013, and the average dairy herd size was up to 150 to 175, and that's probably increased significantly since then. but yet not that many farmers at that time had actually increased their slurry storage. So in essence, farmers probably had the 180 days in wintering period, but as dairy herd sizes and livestock farms have increased in livestock numbers, the investment in slurry storage hasn't kept pace. And that's why.
So, but this new, if it becomes a GBR, general binding rule, you will be a lot more in a much bigger position to enforce that rule, right?
Well, the GBR, if it comes into being, will require farmers to have 22 weeks. Now, there will be farms in and around the country that probably sitting at this period in time, and we've seen from the poll there that a lot of farms, a certain about 70% of farms had between 10 weeks and 22 weeks. I would reckon by better clean dirty water separation, by considering other alternatives to deal with winter runoff from silage pits, maybe the investment of covers, most of those farmers could get to that 22-week capacity by putting in other treatment processes instead of having to invest significantly in another storage facility. So it's looking at the lower cost options to try and remove that clean water to try and get your storage up.
Stephen, so if I'm talking to people about potentially how they're going to be interpreted under that GBR, so in case they want to show compliance, is the current NVZ numbers the best ones to use right now?
Those are the ones that are being recommended in the consultation that Scottish Government had out.
Sorry, I might have missed that.
So they were going with exactly the same numbers as was in with the NVZ.
Okay, I'm sorry I missed that. So,
yeah. Which is back down, is 154 days? Is it 22 weeks?
22 weeks. So in essence, if, although the SAFO regulations have been in since 1991 and we had a 180-day in wintering period, which was just over 6 months, it is being reduced to around 22 weeks capacity across the country, if they bring in those regulations. So it actually is a reduction in slurry storage capacity that'll be required on farms.
So that's an actual change to legislation, right? We're not just talking.
If it comes in, yep. If and when it comes in, yep. So they'll be dropping from the requirement of 180 days to around 154. That's
not really. What's going to be left in SAFO after that? Sorry, this is too technical. I apologize.
Nothing's left in SAFO. It all goes into the controlled activity regulations under general binding rules.
I think the key point to take away is that if you are within that 10 to 22 weeks at the moment, well, we kind of think that there's a possibility to get out and reduce separate the water, that grey water that's getting into your slurry tank now, and have a walk through the state and make sure all your gutters are working and just see where the water is going and making sure, trying to divert it away from the slurry tank if it's clean, and just capturing those areas that need to be captured rather than the rest of it. That kind of thing. That's the first port of call, maybe.
Yeah. From my perspective, that is the first port of call, and that's the first port of call that we'd be looking at from SEPA's perspective, is trying to shed that clean water away from dirty areas and just managing. Yeah.
Easy wins, yeah.
Yeah, easy wins first of all, and get that capacity up.
Great. I have another question here, and this is directed directly at Hugh. So it's with regard to your P&K. You mentioned in previous webinar that you hadn't had to apply P&K for 20 years. What do you attribute that to?
Oh, right. Well, I was going to ask earlier, it's actually been regulate, testing and analysing slurry and knowing what you've got. And again, I think I said on my webinar talk, again, once you know what you've got, you can manage it. But equally so, and there's dairy farmers listening in tonight, but if you're feeding 10,000 plus litre cows, and I'm going to go to the opposite extreme, 5,000-6,000 litre cows, then the resultant slurry is of different value in your nutrient basis. And obviously the higher yielding cows, that excreted manure is carrying more P&K. And if you apply that evenly across your farm, back to Seamus's comment earlier about the ring of confidence, then if you can evenly apply that across your farm over the 12-month period, i.e. over a year, then you are applying a more actual level amount of P&K for getting the end content. And that's how I've sort of valued it. But then again, to back that up, again, every 4 years, I've been doing regular soil testing so that I'm not robbing fields by not applying. So I know where my fields are in terms of within a wide base, if that makes sense. Seamus, like to go back to your question.
Yeah, I think that's really important here, because you're talking about the missing element to that system is the phosphate, but you're getting that from your bought-in feed, because you've got some, you've got a high feed in. So yeah, that's why soil analysis is important, because some systems won't have the same amount of phosphate coming in.
No.
So, so that really is your livestock system in there, because you're, again, if you're lower intensity or you're totally different system, then getting that soil analysis and using some of the book, or using the book values in some of the technical notes, because because you can close that loop. And I know a lot of people, because what you're carefully managing there is your both your phosphate and your potash, but those things can be kept in the system very effectively if you're careful. It's the nitrogen that's hard to control.
Could I come in and make a couple of points, please? It must be, I don't know, 15, 18 years ago, Northern Ireland the whole of Northern Ireland became an NVZ. And the story was the main driver for that wasn't so much the nitrate, because there wasn't a huge amount of groundwater. It was more the level of phosphate we were concerned about, be it in Lough Neagh or Fermanagh Lakes, which were prime fishing, and also in Lough Neagh was eel fishing as well. So they brought in something under EU law. They said, if we make it an NVZ, we can also control phosphate. But about 5 or 6 years ago, one of the research centres in Northern Ireland actually posed a question: with yields of cows getting greater and pushing more feed into the cows, would it make sense to actually reduce the amount of phosphate in a dairy cake? Or what impact would that have on milk yield, fertility, etc.? And they followed that through and basically discovered that they could halve it quite easily, and they didn't actually lose, because at the end of the day, the cow can only absorb a certain amount of phosphate. And the fact that you were actually feeding a lot of cake with the same percentage as you would have been doing if you'd been doing it to an ordinary 6,500 litre cow, that phosphate was going straight through the cow and was ending up in the slurry. So that was their first concern, because in Northern Ireland at the moment, phosphate is fairly tightly regulated. If you want to spread phosphate fertilizer, you have to actually get a soil analysis to show that you can do that you have a need for it. And that possibly is something that will come downstream. I would like to take it back to the farmer's perspective, and I'm a great believer for rules of thumbs, things that people can remember. And I know that in the south of Ireland, they're doing a big drive at the moment to try and encourage as many of the farmers to make use of their slurry. And they've come back and said, look, guys, if you're putting on, they've made it very, very simple. If you've got 1/3 water, 2/3 slurry, it's probably 5% dry matter. In that 5% dry matter slurry, you will have the equivalent in every 1,000 gallons of 1 hundredweight bag. I know we're all into kilograms, but bear with me, I'm an older advisor. 1 hundredweight bag of 5 units of nitrogen, 4 of phosphate, and 28 of potash. And if you start and look at it on that basis and tally it up every time the tanker's gone out, and that's available nutrients, that's not total nutrients, you'll begin to actually say, well, actually, I can do my own budget, my own fertilizer budget. I don't need a computer. I can do it in my head and work out how much I'm putting on, how much the crop needs, and then the difference should only be coming from the bag. And I think until we get that, it becomes second nature, that people value what's actually there in terms of the nutrients. And obviously, if it's, I was going to ask Ian, maybe I would like to come back in again. When you moved onto your trailing shoe, one of the main drivers, yes, it is the carbon footprint reduction, because we're not getting as much emissions going up into the air, volatilization. But obviously the other one is that we're making better use of the nutrients in the slurry, particularly nitrogen. Have you seen any benefit in that? Is it noticeable that are you able to pick out and say, well, actually, my crop seems to be growing better. Do I need to still put on the same amount of bag nitrogen? From a practical point, have you seen any difference over the years? That's to Ian.
I'm with you now. It was a thing I didn't comment at the time, but I would say I've definitely reduced the amount of bag material I'm using and still getting the same results.
Mm-hmm.
But in the past, to go back to old money, we was showing 300 to 400 per acre for silage, but now we're down to about 200 to an acre. which is what, about 250 kilos a hectare now for silage ground, and we seem to be getting the same results. I've not put an awful lot of science into it, right enough. It should be putting more into it, but we seem to be certainly have saved on it, and it'll be reducing our footprint as well. It's probably also important to think about your pH and your lime to help that all to work out as well.
Ian, do you actually analyse your slurry or test it at all?
It hasn't been done. I tried to get it done a couple of years ago and I never got a result back. But it hasn't been done, no, but could do to be doing it. I've been soil testing every 3 to 4 years certainly, and following that up with lime and watching your P&K as well, which as you're saying, a lot of the time we're not really needing the P&K. The fields are quite rich in it already.
And throughout that period, Ian, has your production per cow went up? Have you increased production per cow?
Not really, no. But it's sitting probably about 7,500 to 8,000 litres a cow.
Right, okay.
Most of the time.
They maybe just come in, finish my story. If you're putting on my 5% dry matter slurry, my typical slurry in the summertime with a splash plate, I'm only getting 2 units of nitrogen. I'm not getting 5 that would be getting in the spring. But if I opted to go for either the trailing shoe or the band spreader, that goes back up to 5. So there's free nitrogen that I can get by utilizing some of that machinery, some of that. So it's a case of knowing what you've got, when you can spread it, and how you can get best value out of it. And I think just sitting down and trying to work through, you've got plenty of slurry being produced. It's how do you make best use of that?
Yeah. Okay.
All right, Seamus.
I have one final kind of comment. A question has just come in there. Is it true that cell counts will rise if you spread slurry on grazing paddocks in the grazing season? I want to take that up. Seamus, you're smiling there. Go on.
I was waiting for Hugh to come in. You're the man.
Yeah. He's the man with the cows.
Well, Seamus, I'll comment, but unfortunately, I don't graze a lot of cows these days, so it doesn't have a big effect. Because you don't get 10,500 litre cows by putting them at the grass, but that's another choice. But never mind. But I have grazed cows, but I've never actually picked up on that. And I would probably say, if you're applying a very dilute slurry, be it by shallow injector, by dribble bar or whatever, onto grazing land, you're going to be 3 to 4 weeks at least before you'd be grazing that again anyway. I don't think you would see much, but it's horses for courses, and somebody may have had a bad experience and that's what they're blaming. So I can't comment because I've never encountered it like.
We do have a farmer who moved on to a slurry separated system, and one of the main attractions he got back out of that was he was actually able to spread slurry on some of his grazing paddocks, and he basically cut his nitrogen levels by about half over the summer. He's never come back to me and said he's had problems with his cell count.
How tall on the grass? How tall would you let your grass grow before you put an umbilical through it? What's kind of limits is there? Like in terms of, can you apply it pretty late in the silage?
Well, we're talking silage or grazing. Sorry, the question, Bill, was about grazing cows, but
yeah, no, sorry, no, it's a separate question, but I just slightly linked to it in terms of just how much of the grass is contaminated by the slurry itself.
Well, you want it when it's actively growing, but you don't want any more than probably, I would have said 4 or 5 inches, and that's probably beyond it then too, if the grass is that, if you're on a cutting regime. Like, you don't want to be going in, you want to go in when the ground's clear and it actively absorbs it, and you get the growth.
The trailing shoe would get it down further, would it?
A trailing shoe will go through the crop, but then turning at the ends, there's all these other aspects, you're going to get increased amounts. So I wouldn't advise going into a dense crop of grass. I think you've missed the boat.
The question was on counts, sorry.
Yeah.
And I think that's that answers that question, or maybe it'll give a better idea anyway. The next kind of comment question. It's to do with the consultation that closed last week, the Scottish Government consultation. And I think I'm going to throw Alex under the bus for this one now first off, but what has the reaction been? What have you heard from farmers of the reaction of that consultation?
I think the various clients that I've spoken to have just expressed an overall concern as to how they're going to fund and invest in bringing their current storage up to spec. I think by and large that would be the big takeaway from clients I've spoken to. And that certainly has been echoed by other representatives from within the industry.
Does anyone else want to come in on that? No.
Stephen, I know I maybe unfairly, Stephen, asked you a kind of similar question last week. Can you talk any more about that, or are we still trying to get to grips with what has actually come of it?
At this present point in time, the Scottish Government have taken away the consultation responses, and it's now in their hands to look at those consultation responses and come up with how they're going to take things forward. So really, I'm waiting to hear from Scottish Government on how they've taken the consultation response and what their way forward is for that consultation in terms of the implementation of the regulations. What you said is true. There was a lot of news coverage on the consultation draft, and that all surrounded the area of exempt structures, i.e. structures built prior to 1991. So those structures are well, if you look at it now, are aging. And if you go by the poll that we had on maintenance, you've got some farmers looking at the servicing and looking at stores and maintaining stores every 2 years, where you've got others that haven't looked at them for 10 years. So there's horses for courses in this sort of thing, and for me it's all about maintaining structures and maintaining the viability of those structures, that they remain impermeable and fit for purpose. So we will wait and see what comes out of that consultation and how Scottish Government progress those regulations.
Interesting as well, Stephen, one of the things that I took from the poll was that there is a large proportion of farmers, certainly here tonight, who were within that 10 to 22 weeks capacity. I wouldn't want to suggest that that's indicative of or representative of Scotland more broadly, but it could suggest that there is a requirement out there for support with regards to new structures.
It's an interesting poll that you took, because when I produced SEPA's dairy production sector plan, and we analysed statistics from 420 farms, dairy farms, that we've had one-to-one engagement with in our priority catchments. That's probably half the dairy sector. Now, when we published our consultation, it would have been a year and a half ago. 1/3 of those farmers had less than 3 months slurry storage. 1/3 had between 3 and 6, and the final third had 6 and above, which is very similar to the poll that you had there in terms. So it may be indicative of what's on the ground. But as I said earlier, I think those that are sitting between 10 and 22 weeks, we've got to look for low-cost wins in removing clean water and separating those clean, dirty yard areas, and just looking at how they manage the movement of cattle between yards and that sort of thing to increase. Look at what they're doing with the winter runoff from silage pit. Consider other options to treat that over the winter period instead of putting into the slurry storage system. So there are other means of doing it instead of having to invest in additional slurry storage.
Seamus, I'm conscious that we're just coming up on 9 o'clock now. The conversation has been really good, and I'd like to run a little over if that's at all possible, if we've still got questions there. Is there something to bring Adrian back into the conversation?
There's one question here about the traditional slatted storage, and it's basically asking, are the days of below ground slatted storage are numbered?
Well, they're numbered in terms of cost. I think when we're looking at, there was a comment earlier this evening about priorities and, you know, where is the money spent first, for example, and it's not apparently on the slurry storage. And to a certain extent, I fully understand that. And if we take that as the picture, then on the slat storage is probably the most expensive storage. It can be 4, 5, or 6 times the price of a circular steel or concrete ring tank. And that is typical, that's not extreme. So between 4 and 6 times, and there is that variation in it because there is variation in ground conditions, variation covers and shapes. The advantage it's got, of course, is that it's keeping rainfall out. It's not necessarily keeping ammonia in either. There are ways of keeping ammonia into slurry, which is sitting below slats in storage, both in terms of the store itself and managing that slurry, but it's not really answering the objectives other than keeping rainfall out. And I think probably a good cover will win over that. I think just paying £150 a cube for a below slat store compared with £32 a cube for a steel or concrete ring, compared with paying £15 a cube for a lined lagoon, is really going to show us less below slat storage facilities going in.
The only thing I would say, Adrian, is you have to sometimes maybe look at the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is that labour is getting scarcer. We still have a lot of cattle. We have been used in our neck of the woods down in the southwest, being able to actually outwinter cattle because of the higher rainfall, because of the build-up of nutrients and what have you. We're now discovering that in a lot of cases, farmers would prefer to bring the cattle inside, or needing to bring them inside. And it might also help reduce some of the potential pollution that Stephen's concerned about over the winter, going into ditches and what have you, and also set the fields up for early grazing in the springtime as well. We have one very good suckler guy, and he has been investing in slurry tanks over the last few years, and he bases it on an 80-foot by 40-foot shed with a 13-foot slatted passage within that, and this is for suckler cows, and that'll hold 40 cows. And he says, having done that in terms of labour, that's where the winning bit is. So it's not just about slurry storage cost. You also have to look at the associated labour cost going forward on a lot of these farms, and also the fact, as you already mentioned, the reduction in rainwater going into these tanks because you've got a roof over them. Now, you could argue again whether you actually need that roof over the cows is also debatable, because we have one large beef farmer who has built a couple of these, and they're just open slatted tanks. The cows are quite happy, the beef cattle are quite happy if they've got a bit of protection from the wind. So I think sometimes you need to look at the bigger picture and just make sure that we're taking the whole farm approach.
I think it varies, doesn't it, Seamus, from business to business and
it does indeed,
site to site, because you cannot store for 22 weeks in a slatted below tank, a tank below slats. You can't store for 22 weeks without that tank being in the order of 16 foot deep. A standard 3 metre, which is quite deep, precast panel or cast in situ panel will probably give you about a half to 2/3 of your 22-week storage if you've got dairy cattle on it. So that pushes you into having additional storage beyond what is held below the slats. So you end up with two systems. And I agree, it's entirely appropriate
with beef cattle, though. I think if you have a beef cow, I think you could be able to hold at least the 23 weeks.
That is absolutely right. You can.
It was more the beef side I was looking at, actually. It seems strange, but that's where they're seeing the benefits.
Not many farmers I come across have that 180 or 150 pound a cube to spend on below ground storage. Unfortunately, that, you know, it just stops them. It's obviously the best solution in the case you're citing, but the money has to be there. And you know, it's a pointing question, because we're looking now at a grant scheme which is still sitting at £15. I'm going to the other end of the cost of storage. £15 for the a cube for up to a 2,000 cube lagoon. You know, I can't actually remember. I can remember one in the last 12 months that I've done that has been 2,000 cube or less. Everything I come across is 4,000 cube and bigger these days. In addition to that, and I believe quite rightly so, we're seeing improvements. We've seen required improvements in things like safety fencing, the thickness of the liner, the material of the liner. And this makes a difference. It's a pro rata cost. If we look at HDPE, for example, going from 1.5 to 2 mil thickness, it's pro rata added another quarter onto the price of the liner. And the current grant scheme that's been offered is actually the same as it was the last one round. So we're going to get less storage still, I would imagine, for the same amount of money. As we improve standards, as we improve materials, as we reduce environmental risk, it's going to cost us more and more.
Alex, can I come in the back of that? I was on a call last night with a Dutch building designer, and he mentioned the aspect of underground storage of slurries and the amount of ammonia that's released within a dairy facility and the harmful effect that has. So going forward, okay, we've now had Brexit, we are now no longer under EU rules, but whatever we do or they do, we're all in the same sort of line of thought here. This is something else I think we should be mindful of if we're putting dairy cows going forward. We can't change what we've got, but if you've got dairy cows standing above slurry, and to keep that slurry in suspension, has been a great trend of bubbling systems, and I don't know what Adrian's take is on that. It manages the slurry, but it obviously puts gases up through. And I just think that's probably another aspect we should be considering if you're going to be investing in new storage or whatever. Adrian, have you any comments on that?
Two companies I know that are actively marketing bobbler systems, and bobbler systems are very low rate aeration, not the type of aeration you see typically in sewage treatment works. These are basically running on very, very fine bubbles on a more or less continuous basis. And by continuous, I mean it's split into 3 or 4 manifolds, and you compressor cycles between those manifolds. And that type of aeration of slurry does actually have a depressing effect on ammonia release rather than increase it. But the day you turn it off and decide to turn it on again 2 weeks later, and then turn it off again for a week and turn it on a week later, you're the other way. The ammonia emissions increase. There are 2 of these companies, going back to what I said first of all, that actively sell bubblers, that are now actively selling ammonia removal systems for the airspace, if you like, that is above the slurry and below the slats. Yeah. They have recognized there is an issue here and they are trying to tackle it. So I would agree with you, Hugh, again, that, you know, there is a way forward, but it's going to come at the cost. Yeah. Not only the increased cost of storage to keep the rainfall out and the labor down, but also there will be additional costs to this. You can't practically mix slurry on the slats and easily keep to the recommendations that Seamus would be advocating in his safety presentation. You know, there are practical issues with that. To put a mixer into below cubicles if the building's 100 foot long, you can't do that practically with what we've got from one end and stay out. We tend to ignore those little hard things. You know, we say, okay, we'll do it and walk out again, but you can't do it in the middle. You can't do it a third the way around. So
on the safety thing too, okay, because I've had a couple of conversations with people. Apparently there's gypsum coming around as a bedding material again.
Yes.
So please be aware that is the dangerous stuff. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
I just did again. I had a call. Wasn't really. Yeah, it was not. It was. Yeah, I was disappointed to hear that it's still the message isn't out there.
Bill, is that virgin gypsum or gypsum from the waste industry?
I didn't get that far into the conversation, Stephen, really, because I mean, it wasn't a conversation. There was no conversation to have, okay, because it's not a bedding material. It doesn't matter where it's coming from, okay. So
no, exactly. Just
you know, so it was an offhand comment. It's just an inquiry, okay. But I just want to reinforce everyone on this message and tell everyone else that stuff's not suitable. It's dangerous stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
There is a lagoon in Scotland at the moment where gypsum bedding was used, and there's 1.5 meters of what I would call concrete in the bottom of it. And it's that sort of scenario that, you know, we have to think about the whole picture, as Seamus said.
Yep.
All right. I'm conscious that we're now coming up on 9:15. So I think apologies to anybody who has any lingering questions. We'll do our best to get in touch and get them answered. But for the purposes of tonight, I'd like to draw to a close, if that's okay. Can I just ask? I don't want to put the speakers on the spot too much, but can we maybe go one speaker at a time and just give us your key take-home message, one sentence, if possible. What would you like people to take away from this series as a whole? We'll start with Stephen.
I think my one key message would be I would like to see farmers actually thinking about routine and annual servicing of slurry storage systems, whether it be above ground, whether it be lagoons, or whether it be below ground systems. They're a wee bit harder to look at, but it's just looking to see if there's no leakage from them. But really it is just that routine maintenance. Make sure it's a one-off investment in I believe the generation of that farm. So if you invest in it, let's make sure you maintain it and regularly service it.
Brilliant, thank you. Adrian?
The segregation of clean and dirty water. Over and over again, a very old message. It keeps coming back. We really are no better off now than we were 20 years ago. We are taking a lot of water into slurry systems that we don't need to take.
Thank you. Seamus Donnelly.
Know the value of your slurry and how to get the most benefit out of that slurry. And it'll help the farmer, it'll help his pocket, and it'll also help the climate.
Bill Crooks.
We're going to be facing some increased regulation, very likely. It's time to really have a look at your system in how the regulator is going to look at it. So look at the 4-point plan, NVZ values. These are all the numbers that'll be used, okay? Because our systems are going to be appraised on our livestock numbers, okay? So it's time to really understand your system from that context, and it also allows you to understand some of the nutrient value of the material that you're generating as well.
And Hugh.
Well, my famous saying, I keep quoting at the end of every presentation, it's not what you hay, it's what you do with what you hay. And those that don't understand, it's not what you have, it's what you do with what you have. It's your soils, very important. Test them regularly, know what you have. And as Seamus already said there, test those nutrients in your tanks. It's yours, make the best use of it and apply it evenly across all your farm, not just the ones closest to your sheds. Okay?
That's great. I haven't missed anybody, have I? No, all good. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for joining us tonight, folks. I'd just like to give you another look at our timeline for the webinar series. Obviously, this is the final in our 4-part series, but the recordings of previous meetings and indeed this meeting will go up on the Farming and Water Scotland website. So by all means, stop off there for some helpful resources, some top tips, and these video recordings. And please do get in touch and engage with Farming and Water Scotland going forward. It's really important that we know what you guys are interested in, and we can cater to what the demands are within the sector. And just on that note, folks, Farming and Water Scotland, for those who don't know, for those who have maybe missed a couple of meetings, Farming and Water Scotland is a joint initiative between the SAC and the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, with the aim and overarching objective of improving Scotland's water quality and the water quality of the farmed environment. So for those who are familiar, you might have come across the Know the Rules, Mind the Gap guides. But in addition to that, there's also a variety of resources available at the Farming and Water Scotland website, and obviously supported by the Scottish Government and in association with the Farm Advisory Service. So thank you very much for joining us for the series. Thanks again to our specialist panel for tonight. I think it's been really good. Thanks to Ian Watson for agreeing to come on and talk to us. Hopefully we haven't scared you off, Ian. Yeah, I just on that note, folks, thanks very much, and we'll see you in the future.